joining us today on Lattes With Leaders.
I'm Zeinab.
And I'm Trisha. And we're excited for you to join us as we catch up over coffee with CEOs and executives from diverse backgrounds and industries.
We seek to discover what is unique about each leader and educate you guys on new and interesting topics. Our conversations seek to enlighten and inspire people from around the world to realize that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things.
It's not like there is a single, there's a formula for success, right? So you bring your individuality, you bring your strengths, and you parlay your strengths into what is needed to maybe do a particular role, that particular area.
Today, we're excited to speak with Sanyogita Shamsunder, currently the Global Head of Network Edge at Google. Sanyogita has over 20 years of business and technical experience at both large Fortune 500 enterprises and startup tech companies. She is renowned for spearheading 5G technology development and implementation at Verizon. She's an active mentor and advocate for women in technology. She serves on the Dean's Advisory Board at NYIT and Rutgers University, Technical Advisory Board of Maxlinear and American Tower, and a founder member of Neythri. We speak with her today about the unique challenges of building a career as a tech leader and the future of edge computing. Stay tuned. Thank you so much for joining us, Sanyogita. We're so excited to have you on the podcast. When I was researching, people for our podcast, your profile really stood out to me, not just because you are a successful tech leader, but firstly, you've been spearheading some of the most interesting technologies in today's world, 5G and edge computing, which are some concepts I'm really excited to explore later in the episode. But also as a woman of color, to really have achieved the success that you have as a tech leader at some of the most prominent tech companies of today. I just think that that's an incredible achievement, and it's something that we can all be inspired by. So I'm very excited to uncover your story.
Thank you. Looking forward to sharing my experiences.
So to start off with, would you be able to share a little bit about your background and sort of what has led you to your career to date?
I just fell in love with math in middle school, and I wanted to continue studying math, and that led me to engineering. Having come from a family of doctors with really no engineers in the family, not even male engineers, I was the first one in an extended family. I really went by my interest in analytical and mathematical topics. Anyway, long story short, I ended up studying electronic engineering. That was kind of the hardest to get into. So I got in, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. And I really developed a lot of interest as I took more coursework, and as I went into senior year, I really loved the communications and the mathematical part of electronics engineering, and I continued my grad studies in communications and signal processing. I completed my PhD, and the industry evolved, and I ended up in industry, and I really enjoyed the work, the design, and so on of all the wireless and the satellite communications. And here I am in that industry now.
Amazing. And I always think it's incredible when we meet people who've managed to get really far in their career, not just by chance, but actually by following their passions and following their interests, particularly in a field like technology, because I also work in tech, but not as an engineer. And I just find it's really difficult to actually keep up with technology itself. We're in a world where technology is changing so quickly. Every other day there's a new application, there's a new code language to learn. How do you, as a senior leader within a tech organization, keep up with such a dynamic and ever-changing industry?
I'm not going to say that I know the nitty-gritty of every new technology that comes about. That's quite impossible for any person to achieve. But what is important is that you have your basics grounded, right? Like have a strong foundation. There are many languages now. Like a few years ago, there was only C, or then Java came along, and then there's Python, and then there are other languages. But I think once you learn one, it's very easy to pick up the others if you so choose to, if that's the path that you're on. But if you are more in the management track after a certain point, what you do is you basically, when you build the basics and are able to see the big picture and understand the technology trade-offs and understand how you evaluate projects and how you evaluate different technologies and different approaches to a problem, you start looking at the big picture and kind of connecting the dots and knowing when to ask the right questions in terms of risks and opportunities in any particular project is what you bring to the table. Like being able to see, okay, I've seen a pattern here, right? This has happened before. Something like this takes that long to get really adoption. So a lot of those elements are very important and come in handy as you progress in your career. Of course, you need to keep up with the understanding of a technology at maybe at a high level, and if it interests you, you can go down deep, take a course or whatever. But it's impossible to know it like deep down inside out, just like you did in for your first course or something.
And it's interesting because I think we've all been there where you start your career and you are in the detail, you're deep in the technology, you understand all of the processes, whatever your role is. And personally, what I found the most challenging was when I pivoted from being the person who had all the answers to then leading a team and actually having to give more of that leadership advice and direction. What are your thoughts on how you kind of went from being the SME, being the one who kind of had all of those answers, and particularly in a technical field, I think it's even more relevant, to then not necessarily having all the information or all the right information at your fingertips and transitioning into a very different kind of role?
Yeah, initially it is a little bit of a challenge, right? So the way I approached it is to be a technical manager. So you have some parts of the project that you own, and you have a deep understanding of. You design, architect, code, whatever that may be, and then you have a team that you work with for their individual projects. So that way you are not like, at least the transition is easier, where you say, okay, I have this portion and I'm responsible for. I'm also responsible to manage these three or four people, people's deliverables, understand clear their roadblocks, understand their challenges, and set them up for success. So that's an approach that can work. So you're not jumping in day one into handing off everything. And as you build the team, as you gain the experience to manage people, the projects become bigger and bigger, and it's really hard for you to keep up with that. And then you learn to delegate more.
Yeah. I also wanted to chat a little bit about what it takes to be a leader in different environments, because I know in your career, I can see that you've worked at both large companies and at smaller companies and startups. And I mean, I've done a little bit of that as well. I've been in consulting and consulted for large sort of telecommunication clients. And then now I've recently jumped into the startup world. And for me, the startup world has been a very different experience in the sense that I've been across a lot of different sorts of projects, working with different teams cross-functionally, and it's been teaching me a lot of things that I probably wouldn't have gained in a larger company. But wanted to hear your thoughts on sort of some of the pros and cons and sort of how you grow yourself to be a leader in each of those contexts, in both like the smaller companies, but also in the larger enterprises.
Startups, you end up being responsible for many aspects, because it's a startup. There are not too many people. Then the company is growing, so you get to learn hands on a lot of different aspects and help to grow. In a larger company, sometimes you have the luxury of having more resources. You can explore a few of the areas, and even there, being able to understand what is it that the employee may be looking for in career growth, and how can you help him or her get the next best thing is also very important, right? Giving the right projects, like you may have multiple projects that you have the flexibility to assign. How do you choose who does what, right? What are some growth areas that this person needs that you may want to give this project to? And then maybe, stakeholdering is much more important in a larger company, because you need to be working with different teams, different groups, making them understand their priorities and make sure your priorities are aligned with their priorities. So a lot more external hand-holding and collaboration needed in a larger company versus a smaller company. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does answer my question. And actually, going off that, I'm just hypothesizing of what it's like to grow your career in a larger company. It does take a little bit of being able to understand the dynamics of the company, and also being able to showcase the impact of your work to different senior stakeholders. I wanted to hear a little bit more about what it took for you to sort of develop your career and also get on these very exciting projects that you've been very well known for, like the 5G, and then now you've moved into edge computing.
I wish I had a good answer to that. The way I approach my job is to be not necessarily limited by what is written on paper sometimes, right? Because it's really difficult to articulate everything in a job description. So being creative, thinking outside the box, and knocking down barriers has been the way I have approached my job. Like, okay, I need to do this. Like, what is the industry doing? Having the pulse on the industry, having a pulse on the competition. Where is technology going? And being able to see around the corners, right? So that has led me to kind of envision projects and programs that kept the company ahead of the curve in some ways. So sometimes challenging the orthodoxies inside the company as well. So maybe not in an abrasive way, but nudging people to think about, like, why not? Why can't we do this? Why shouldn't we be able to do it this way? So I believe that is one of the strengths that I bring, that being able to challenge and ask questions, and that led me to essentially picking up projects that seemed like difficult uphill battles, but not that I was successful always. There were times when I had to abandon what we did, or it took longer than I thought it would originally do. But in some ways, sometimes you don't know the unknowns, and you don't be scared of doing that and pushing the envelope a bit. Find a couple of people who are in your court, and exchange ideas with them, and get their feedback. But being able to think outside the box, thinking of the competition, looking around the corners, I think those are some things that have helped me, I believe.
I just had a follow up on that. So, working with engineers, I've personally been working with engineers for the last 11 years. And what I find very fascinating about developers is they are extraordinarily passionate about the products they're building, the way that the code is being written. Was that something that you were able to, as you were like still an engineer, how did you channel that yourself in terms of these interesting projects, like when they were really hard and really tough? How did you get through them on the other side? And then as you move to a leadership role, how do you continue to inspire people who are really at risk of burnout?
I myself, actually, I was on maternity leave, and I had just delivered, and there was something that was due like a couple of weeks from when I came back, or actually towards the end of my maternity leave as well. And I was so stressed out, and I remember sitting in front of the computer and like starting to panic and cry, saying like, I can't do this. So I remember my
Oh,
husband. it was
I've been there. Not
uh,
post having children, but I've been there on projects.
yeah. So my advice to my younger self, and to younger women, especially women who are looking to have children and are afraid of disrupting their careers and so on. I tell them it's okay. you don't think that the world is coming to an end, or things are, your career is going to be disrupted, it's really okay. I think you can take the time off, enjoy the time, because it's not going to come back. You're not going to get it back. So take the time off and come back fully recovered. Other than that, yes, there is a risk of burnout. Some people work extremely hard on certain projects at certain times, and you have to remind them to take a break. I mean, I think as a manager, you have to have that empathy and understand where you need to push a little bit, and maybe give them support, have another person take up parts of the project, or you can't have a single point of failure as well in a company. So having multiple people assigned to things, and maybe not overlapping, but having different parts of it, so that you can take a break. I mean, it's okay to do that. I think that's also important when you're planning your projects.
In many of the companies you've worked at, Sanyogita, at the leadership level, there is a bit of a lack of women of color on like the highest levels of leadership. And I mean, of course, that's changing now. But at the time that you would have been rising to the levels of leadership that you're at, it would have been tricky to see the role models in front of you and be able to learn from those role models and sort of be able to adapt your career through those role models. I guess, how did you progress your career in the absence of that? What was your sort of strategy? And I know you've touched a little bit on it earlier in terms of just believing in yourself and taking the time out for yourself to recognize what's important and what's not. But I guess from a career perspective, what does that strategy look like?
I don't know that I had one role model that I would say, okay, this is the person I want to be. I'm like, okay, I want to do this well, but I also, my brand was also being able to have the technical breadth across many areas, but be able to go into depth as needed. And I didn't see too many people around me that were like that. So it was hard for me to it's hard this is hard for me to answer this question. I just wanted to do the right thing for the company, and whether it leads to a VP role or not. Of course, I wanted to be, progress in my career, but there was not a standard like job description that led me there. You know what I'm saying? Or a
Yeah.
particular, because everybody's paths are different. Everybody has. I mean, if you look at, like, I love looking at people's biographies to see how did they get to where they are. It's not like there is a single, like there's a formula for success, right? So you bring your individuality, you bring your strengths, and you parlay your strengths into what is needed to maybe do a particular role at that particular area. Almost every job that I've had has been kind of defined or needed, and I happen to fit the characteristic needed for the job. Whether it be like leading the 5G program, where it was like thinking out of the box, being able to influence the industry. So I don't know that there was a job description that was given to me before saying that, okay, if you do this, and this, you'll get this job. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
Yeah.
you need to create your own path.
I think what's really amazing about what you're saying is there's 2 points that I picked up on. One, I think, is always doing right by the organization. And I think that is something critical that we don't talk about enough. And at work, we don't even talk about enough, because you've always got your bosses' aspirations and their take on things, and then you've got their
Mm-hmm.
bosses, and there's a lot of stakeholders who all have different motives around the behaviors that they're doing. And I think there aren't enough leaders who really think about what is the best thing for this organization and what's the best thing for our customers. And then the second thing that you said that really like struck me was around that last piece on you do the best that you can and you bring your individuality to a role. And that's something as well, I don't like, sometimes I just don't think we talk about that enough, because I think there's definitely been a movement of bring yourself to work, but I think there's still an element of finding an organization where you can be yourself at work, because each
Mm-hmm.
different organization has its own culture, and sometimes the culture of the organization and your individuality doesn't necessarily match or fit that well. I don't know if you've had any personal experiences of that, but I know I've definitely felt that in some of the jobs that I've done, where, you know, you don't feel as comfortable being able to kind of really bring your true self at work. And I think there's an element of that probably which comes with being a minority and being a woman. And a lot of the areas that I've worked in have been heavily male dominated because I work in finance tech. So
Yeah.
there aren't a lot of women around, let alone women of color.
Yeah, I must say I have been lucky in that sense. Um, Again, I think we all have unconscious biases, I feel. So I think we ourselves need to be constantly checking to make sure that we don't necessarily fall in the same trap as we think some others do. So that would be my other advice to the listeners is be careful of your own biases as well, right? So be open, be empathetic, and be open to learning new ways. Be open to understanding the other person, where they come from. That helps things, develop relationships a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this conversation because I feel like we can talk about it for a long while. I feel like there's a lot in there in terms of building your identity and brand. And I do want to get into our final topic, which is around actually the technologies that you've been pioneering at the companies that you've been working at. And specifically, I wanted to dive into edge computing. So, some of our listeners, well, many of our listeners will be familiar with the concept of cloud computing, but I feel like edge computing is maybe something that's not as well known in the sense that people aren't necessarily familiar with what it means. Would you be able to describe in simple terms what the concept of edge computing is and how is it different from cloud computing and what can it enable?
The cloud computing world started off with centralized stuff, and basically what edge computing does is bring that computing closer to the user, whatever the user may be. It is a machine or a person or a smartphone or an industrial environment or a hospital, whatever it may be. It brings closer, actually physically closer, not just logically closer, right? So why is that important now, right? Because when enterprises started using cloud computing, it was more to essentially run processes that are not maybe time sensitive, right? Like they can be run overnight or they can be run. I don't really care whether this finishes in milliseconds and so on. Latency was not biggest reason why you put things in the cloud. It has the flexibility of any time, every time. You don't have to have the same level of support and so on. But when you think about applications that require really low latency, which means the turnaround time is extremely small and important, then edge computing becomes extremely critical, right? Like for example, if you're talking about being able to run a factory floor where there are humans and robots cooperating, as they call it, coboting at the same time. If for from a safety perspective, it's very important that the navigation for the robot be taking into account the human interactions, right? So latency is going to be extremely important in that situation, especially if you use edge computing to run the robot, right? Like all the smarts that are needed for operating the robot are running in a cluster that is maybe close by in proximity. So the time it takes for the information to go to the cluster and come back is significantly small. Blink of an eye, as they say. So it's basically taking the cloud computing and distributing it to the edges. And the same companies are kind of doing that, like the large cloud companies, Amazon, Google, Microsoft. And why is this particularly happening at this time? Well, the wireless and the telco operators have now moving to from 4G to 5G, and the 5G network offers that flexibility and the capability to be able to have the compute closer to the user. So previously the 4G architecture was more centralized, so you had to travel through the entire network of the operator before you went to the internet. In the 5G world, you can do it closer to the cell phone, for example, closer to the tower, and that means that you can have compute right there.
Yeah, and it feels like there are just so many use cases that are enabled through the onset of edge computing and 5G. I mean, you've described one perfect example here, which is like the industrial IoT use case where you have machinery in different, you could have one in the farm, one in the factory, one in a mine, and they are operating by themselves and taking in data on the spot and are able to perform different activities and tasks based on that data real time. And there are just so many use cases beyond that, even. I mean, I was reading that even self-driving vehicles would be reliant on this kind of technology. And, smart cities, lots of retail applications as well. If you want to deliver like a very seamless in-store experience using technology, a lot of these would need the capabilities that you're working on. And I have also read a report by Gartner, which says that in the next few years, we would expect around 75% of all enterprise data to be processed on the edge, which is like a huge volume of data. I mean, that would be surpassing the limits that currently are on the cloud. But I'm curious, what will it take for the adoption of this technology to sort of surpass the cloud? What do you think is going to be needed for us to really harness the edge to its fullest potential?
That's a great question, right? Even cloud computing, I believe that less than 20% of the enterprises have workloads running on cloud. So even cloud is still in the early days, I would say, and add that to edge. And you're right. I mean, the organizations should be able to understand what the capabilities are, what it brings, right? Some new applications will be developed. Some, if you look at Uber, right? Uber didn't exist before the smartphone, but did we build the smartphone for Uber? No, absolutely not. We built the smartphone, and then a lot of new applications came along that we had never thought about, right? So I'm sure there are many new use cases that not that we have no idea about those today that will be developed. But in terms of migrating to edge, there are a lot of companies who still have on-prem servers and dedicated hardware for different applications, especially in industrial environments and hospitals and so on and so forth. And being able to move those to edge cloud, you can call it edge cloud. It's kind of the same thing, but if you look into under the hood, it requires different ways of how you would architect your program, your systems, right? And how do you build an appliance that take or a product that takes advantage of the edge will require some more understanding of by organizations, by the experts within the organizations. How can I take advantage of this for my operational simplicity? So yeah, more knowledge is needed. Experts, if people who understand both sides of the coin in terms of what is the pain point and what are the tools available to build solutions to address that pain point are needed.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. And I mean, on top of education, it's also the investment to create a better experience for customers or to improve the operations of the business to a degree that wasn't possible before. So I'm very excited to see what will come of the edge and the cloud over the next 5 to 10 years.
Sanyogita, thank you so much for doing this again with us. But also, I think the content's going to help so many females, particularly, I think, in the tech space, to just think about what their career looks like and how to inspire them to just reach for that next level and hopefully take on or at least push for more management positions. Because I just don't think people we get enough of those people putting themselves forward for such opportunities. So I'm really hoping that this episode is able to inspire more people to at least have the aspiration to go to more senior levels.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Don't forget to check out our more recent episodes where we connect with global female CEOs to explore how to make it to the top. Whether your ambition is to be an executive at a corporate, build a franchise, or pivot your traditional career, check us out. Be sure to give us a like or follow on LinkedIn, TikTok, or Instagram at Lattes With Leaders. Our mission is to hear the voices of women from around the world. So if you're an avid listener and want your voice heard through our platform, please reach out.